Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Dark, frigid water presses against the hull of a silent hunter, miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic, where the only link between the president and the nuclear silos is a thin, vulnerable vein of copper. You are inside the war room of the late 1950s, a place of flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of ozone from computers, where the maps on the wall are crossed by the fragile threads of undersea telegraph cables. There is a chilling realization in the room. A single Soviet ship, equipped with a simple grappling hook, could sever these lines and plunge the Western world into a strategic silence, leaving the nuclear triad blind and deaf at the moment of peak crisis. You find yourself standing on the edge of the future inside a high-ceilinged, clean room at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. The air is filtered and still, smelling of soldering flux. Around you, men in thin white ties and horn-rimmed glasses lean over stainless steel canisters, their breath held as they inspect millions of shimmering filaments that look like handfuls of golden hair. These aren't just industrial scraps. They are the dipoles, the individual neurons of a planetary nervous system designed to survive the end of the world. You can feel the hum of the vacuum pumps and the weight of the secret that the United States is about to physically alter the silhouette of the Earth. Imagine the tactile reality of the payload, billions of copper whiskers being loaded into specialized dispensers, each needle meticulously cut to resonate with a specific military frequency. You are watching a technician calibrate the spinning mechanism that will release these needles into the void, knowing that once the hatch opens, there is no way to reel the shroud back in. The atmosphere in the lab is a pressurized mixture of scientific triumph and existential dread, as the team realizes they are about to essentially salt the Earth of the orbital environment to ensure a single unbreakable radio link. Outside, the cold wind of a Massachusetts winter whips against the massive concrete housing of the haystack antenna. You are part of the team monitoring the telemetry, eyes straining at green phosphor screens that display the mathematics of orbital mechanics. There is a profound sense of playing God in the room, a silent acknowledgement that if this succeeds, the night sky will never truly be natural again. You aren't just launching a satellite, you are weaving a metallic shroud around the globe, creating a permanent artificial mirror in the stars that will ensure the voice of the commander-in-chief can pierce through any storm, man-made or solar. As the countdown reaches its final seconds at the launch site, you perceive the staggering momentum of a project that intends to turn the entire planet into a giant passive radio receiver. The engineering is immense, but the risk is even greater, an overwhelming flood of scientific protest and geopolitical tension rising as the rocket ignites. You aren't just an architect of a communication link, you are building a bastion in the heavens that intends to catch every radio wave. To your left, a case officer monitors the orbital scatter assessment, its pages a blur of density calculations and social selectors. The setting is one of scientific excellence masking total strategic manipulation, where the private dreams of space exploration are siphoned into the sifting algorithms of a ghost in the ionosphere. This is Westford. Why Westford? The designation wasn't chosen for its poetic value, but for its proximity to the heart of the research. The reason for the name lies in the location of the primary ground station used for the experiment, Westford, Massachusetts. The town housed the massive Haystack Observatory, which featured a 120-foot radio antenna capable of tracking the microscopic needles as they dispersed into orbit. By tethering the project's name to the ground site, the military maintained a veneer of localized academic research for a project that was, in reality, a global strategic gambit. To understand the sheer audacity of the copper ring, we must look at the technical specifications that moved this from a chalkboard to a launch pad. The needles were exactly 1.78 centimeters long because that length represents half the wavelength of the 8,000 megahertz signal. The needles were only 25 micrometers in diameter, thinner than a human hair. The first launch occurred on October 21st, 1961, aboard a Midas 4 satellite. The initial 1961 payload failed to disperse because the naphthalene, NAPHTHALENE binder did not sublimate correctly. The 1961 payload became a single clump of copper that was tracked as a dangerous piece of space debris. The successful 1963 launch carried approximately 20 kilograms of copper needles. The needles were ejected from a spinning dispenser to ensure centrifugal force spread them into a belt. Within 40 days, the needles formed a complete ring around the Earth at an altitude of 3,500 to 3,800 kilometers. The belt was designed to reflect X-band radio waves. The Soviet Union denounced the project as an act of war against astronomical science. The Palomar Observatory reported significant light scattering during the dispersal phase. The needles were calculated to have a lifetime of 5 years due to solar radiation pressure. Contrary to calculations, thousands of needle clumps are still tracked by a space command today. The project was initially codenamed Project Needle. The haystack antenna was specifically built to communicate with the belt. Voice transmissions were successfully sent from Camp Parks, California to Massachusetts. The data transmission rate achieved was approximately 20,000 bits per second. The Vatican issued a soft critique regarding the stewardship of the heavens. The needles were manufactured by the General Electric Company. Each needle acted as a passive satellite requiring no power source. The project was overseen by Walter E. Morrow of MIT. The United Nations debated the project's legality under the concept of environmental modification. The needles were designed to be pushed into the atmosphere by the sun's light pressure. Large clumps of needles often fell into the atmosphere over the polar regions. The experiment was officially terminated in 1964. The project cost approximately $5 million in early 1960s currency. Optical astronomers feared the belt would create a permanent twilight effect. Radio astronomers feared the belt would reflect terrestrial noise back to their receivers. The belt's density was only about 5 needles per cubic kilometer once fully dispersed. The needles were made of high-purity, oxygen-free copper. The dispersion was monitored by the Millstone radar. The belt allowed for communication even during a nuclear blackout of the ionosphere. The military considered launching several belts at different altitudes for redundancy. The project predated the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. Many of the needles re-entered the atmosphere as micrometeors. The Air Force maintained that the needles would have no effect on manned spaceflight. Some scientists proposed a westward belt of gold to prevent corrosion. The project was a direct response to the 1958 Starfish Prime nuclear test, which I have an episode on. The belt could be tuned to different frequencies by changing the length of the needles in future launches. The needles were essentially chaff on a planetary scale. The successful 1963 launch was aboard a Thor Agena rocket. The project was a key driver in the development of digital voice encryption. The belt was so thin it was invisible to the naked eye. The White House received thousands of angry letters from amateur astronomers. The Westford name is still used in space debris literature as a primary case study. The project's failure to fully deorbit is cited in modern Kessler syndrome warnings. The needles are officially categorized as small object space debris. The 1963 needles provided a 100% reliable link during the test window. The project was the first time solar radiation pressure was used as a primary deorbiting strategy. Some needles are believed to have escaped Earth's orbit into interplanetary space. The needles were found to be remarkably resistant to the vacuum of space. The belt demonstrated that the passive approach was more jam-proof than active electronics. The project utilized the most advanced computer modeling of the era. The needles were designed to be invisible to non-military radar. The experiment proved that humanity could intentionally alter the Earth's electromagnetic environment. A quote from an internal memo from the MIT Lincoln Laboratory. We are essentially creating a permanent man-made ionosphere that will be immune to the whims of the sun. A statement by the Soviet Academy of Sciences: "The sky belongs to all of humanity. To litter it with copper for a military experiment is a violation of the scientific trust." A quote from a redacted Pentagon strategic planner, no name: "If the cables are cut, the copper ring is the only voice we have left." Quote from a declassified CIA Directorate of Science and Technology briefing: "The agency's interest in Westford lies not in the communication, but in the potential for large-scale signal interception via orbital reflection." Quote from a declassified CIA intelligence estimate on space security: "We must prepare for the contingency that the Soviets attempt to seed our belt with their own dipoles to disrupt our traffic." That's a memorandum to the president on space policy. Doesn't say who sent it, though. Project Westford represents the first step in the physical conquest of the near-Earth environment for national defense. And a quote from an internal CIA liaison report to the Department of Defense: "The political fallout from the scientific community is a secondary concern to the integrity of the nuclear command and control link." End quote. When the Project Westford files were partially declassified in the late 20th century, a significant portion of the long-term environmental impact and active jamming countermeasures folders remained behind a wall of black ink. The most heavily redacted section is folder 4C, titled Tactical Perturbations of the Magnetosphere. This section contains approximately 185 pages of total sanitization. The redactions are under exemption B1, which are extensive, specifically concerning the signal amplification section. I suspect these missing pages discuss the possibility of using the belt as an active weapon, not just a passive reflector. I believe the military research charging the belt to create a high-altitude electrical shield that could fry the electronics of incoming Soviet missiles. Furthermore, the redactions in the deorbiting protocols suggest the agency knew the needles would stay in orbit much longer than publicly admitted, and may have included a plan to scavenge the belt using magnetic satellites, a technology that remains classified. When you throw 500,000 needles into the sky, the world starts to wonder what you're really doing. For instance, there's the weather modification theory. This speculation suggests that the copper belt wasn't for radio, but was an early experiment in geoengineering. Proponents argue the belt was intended to reflect solar radiation to cool the planet or alter the jet stream over Soviet territory. Then there's the alien signal jammer conspiracy. It's a fringe one that posits that the military detected a signal from deep space, and the 480 million needles were a curtain meant to block a specific frequency from reaching the public or to prevent a signal from leaving Earth. Then there's the orbital web theory. Some believe the needles were never meant to be passive, but were actually the first layer of a global mind control grid intended to interact with human brainwaves once high-powered ground stations reach sufficient strength. And then there's the stealth satellite cloak theory. It suggests the needles were intended to create a layer of electromagnetic noise that would hide top-secret American satellites from Soviet radar, acting as a permanent orbital smokescreen for the most sensitive intelligence assets. Was Project Westford a success? Tactically, it was a qualified success. The 1963 belt proved that a passive reflector could indeed carry high-priority military traffic across the transcontinental distance. It solved the problem of the silent gap and provided a proof of concept for non-terrestrial communications. However, it was quickly rendered obsolete by the rapid advancement of active communication satellites, which offered much higher bandwidth without littering the magnetosphere. The success extended into the validation of survivable systems. Unlike active satellites with delicate transistors that could be fried by high-altitude nuclear EMPs, the Westford needles were physically immune to electromagnetic pulse damage. This realization shifted military doctrine toward hardened and distributed architectures, moving away from centralized vulnerable nodes. The project essentially created a global mesh network decades before the term existed, providing a level of resilience that modern satellite constellations are still struggling to replicate in high-threat environments. Strategically, it was a diplomatic disaster. The project galvanized the international scientific community against the U.S. military, leading to the formation of strict space debris protocols. It served as a cautionary tale of tragedy of the commons in orbit, proving that a single nation's security needs could potentially compromise the scientific heritage of the entire species. The project was also a masterclass in unintentional transparency. By launching such a massive and controversial payload, the U.S. inadvertently forced the development of international space law, culminating in the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. It forced the world to agree that space was a global commons that could be unilaterally altered by one power. While it caused immediate friction with the Soviet Union and the UK, it ultimately stabilized the rules of the road for orbit, preventing a chaotic era where nations might have launched even more destructive atmospheric modifications without oversight. As far as technological and operational breakthroughs go, Westward had quite a few, such as passive dipole communication was the core of Westward. Today, this has evolved into RFID technology. Just as the needles reflected radio waves to carry data, the tiny antennas in your credit cards and inventory tags reflect signals to ground readers. For humanity, this technology allows for the seamless tracking of global supply chains, automated inventory management, and the tap-to-pay convenience that powers modern commerce. In the intelligence world, it is the basis for passive bugs and non-powered surveillance devices that can remain dormant and undetectable for years, only activating when illuminated by a remote signal. The military employs this breakthrough for smart dust sensors, thousands of microscopic reflectors that can be scattered over the battlefield to track enemy movements or chemical signatures via reflected radar signals without ever needing a battery. Orbital debris modeling was birthed by the necessity of tracking 480 million needles. Today, this technology is what allows organizations like NASA and SpaceX and Blue Origin to launch rockets safely through a crowded sky without colliding with the space junk left over from the Cold War. For humanity, it ensures that the GPS, weather, and telecommunication satellites we rely on every day remain intact and functional by predicting potential conjunction events days in advance. In the military and intelligence sphere, it has evolved into Space Situational Awareness, SSA, a critical capability for monitoring the movements of adversarial satellites and determining if an orbital collision was a random accident or a targeted kinetic attack. This same modeling allows the military to calculate the debris footprint of an anti-satellite weapon, ensuring that a strike on an enemy target doesn't create a cloud of shrapnel that destroys their own assets. Bistatic radar systems were refined to track the westward belt. This involves a transmitter and a receiver at different locations. Today, for humanity, this technology is used in passive radar systems that detect aircraft by using existing ambient signals from cell towers and radio stations rather than emitting their own. This is particularly valuable for airport safety and weather monitoring in urban areas without adding more electromagnetic noise to the environment. In the military sphere, this is a primary method for detecting stealth aircraft, which are designed to deflect radar away from the source transmitter, but cannot hide from a receiver positioned at a different angle to catch the scattered energy. The intelligence community utilizes these systems to monitor foreign airspace clandestinely, hitching a ride on the adversary's own television and radio broadcasts to see what they are hiding in their skies. Microwave scatter communications evolved from the reflective nature of the copper needles. Today, for humanity, this tech is utilized in over-the-horizon telecommunications for remote mining camps, oil rigs, and polar research stations where satellite coverage is patchy or unavailable. It provides a vital link for emergency services in rugged terrain by bouncing signals off the atmosphere itself. For the military and intelligence community, it has evolved into tropospheric scatter TROPO systems, which provide ultra-secure, high-capacity, and GEM-resistant communication links between mobile command centers and deep cover locations. Because these signals are highly directional and rely on specific atmospheric scattering points, they are incredibly difficult for an enemy to intercept or disrupt, ensuring that the chain of command remains unbroken even if the primary satellite network is neutralized. We stand today under a sky that still holds the ghost of Project Westward, where nearly 500 million needles once promised a future of unbreakable connection. This endeavor was the ultimate technological prayer of the Cold War, a metallic shroud woven by scientists at Lincoln Laboratory to catch the whispers of the state before they could be silenced. It remains a staggering reminder that the vacuum above us is not an empty void, but a strategic canvas where the ink is written in copper. The copper ring didn't just reflect signals, it reflected the absolute desperation of an era that feared the darkness of a cut cable more than the clutter of 1,000 orbits. The operational reality of the scatter belt has settled into the very architecture of our modern world, turning the orbital lanes into a managed landscape of risk and reward. We no longer see the shimmer of dipoles, but we live within the precision of the debris models they necessitated, a digital fingerprint of a time when the sky was a battlefield of radio waves. This project proved that for the military, the ionosphere was just the first frontier, and the true prize was the ability to manufacture a permanent man-made environment that answered only to the Pentagon. Every successful ping across the copper cloud was a victory for stability, but it was purchased with a legacy of orbital pollution that we are still sifting through today. As we look back at the metallic bastion in the stars, we see the birth of the doctrine of orbital manipulation. The ability to craft a man-made mirror in the heavens remains the pinnacle of mid-century engineering, turning the planet's magnetosphere into an interactive tool for national defense. Westford provided the blueprint for the modern space situational awareness era, ensuring that the void is never truly silent and that no signal is ever beyond the awareness, that no signal is ever beyond the research of a well-placed reflector. This blueprint is now being used to conduct even more advanced systems that seek to map and manage the very fabric of human global connectivity. The real lesson of the copper ring is that in the theater of strategic survival, the environment itself is a weapon to be tuned and deployed. The student of history sees in Westford a calculated reality where the orbital plane is the key and the agency is the silent observer of the heavens. In the quiet darkness of the upper atmosphere, the talent spotter for the next great breakthrough is always waiting, watching to see which shimmering spark will provide the next unbreakable link. We are the inheritors of this metallic legacy, living in a world where the stars themselves are bound by the invisible ties of a Cold War dream. When the cables go dark, the sky is your only mirror. Innovation is often a polite word for desperation. You cannot litter the heavens without darkening the earth. And remember, the most secure communication is the one the enemy can see but never stop. Thanks for listening. Join us next time as we examine AE Ready, a high-stakes paramilitary training program for exiles designed to pierce the Iron Curtain from within. We'll look at the talent identification of displaced persons, the clandestine drop zones of Eastern Europe, and the brutal reality of the stay-behind armies that were intended to trigger a revolution that never came. Join us next time for The Exile's Edge. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.